Oscar Piastri denies Lando Norris sprint pole in Sao Paulo as Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Perez both endure sprint quali shockers. Elsewhere, Charles Leclerc is punished for swearing in Mexico City. Max Verstappen's grid penalty for a new ICE is confirmed, and Kevin Magnussen is ruled out of the entirety of the event. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Park. It's not quite the next day, which is what we've come used to with our recordings for the last couple of weekends. It is still Friday, happy days at the time of the recording, and we've got to start, though, with something which technically happened in Mexico City. Charles Leclerc has been punished for swearing during the FIA press conference, but, and this is the big but, it is not the same punishment that Max Verstappen received in Singapore.
You're right, Nick. It seems that the FIA has decided upon itself to determine there is a level of swearing. As we know, in Singapore, Max used the F word to describe his car during the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. This was deemed to be rude, coarse, and may cause offence. And on the back of that, the stewards determined that Max would be obliged to effectively carry out what we've described as a form of community service. They used the exact term as to accomplish some work of public interest. So that was Max's use of the F word. That was his punishment. And I've described there why that punishment was levied, the way Max used the F word. With regard to Charles Leclerc, he used the F word post Mexico City Grand Prix in the official FIA press conference there. Now, the FIA has determined that Charles' use of the F word was brought about because he was asked what they have described as a leading question in terms of what did you say to yourself as he went off track in Mexico City. As you may recall, just casting our minds back, Charles was running in second place. He was being chased for the runner-up position by Lando Norris. Lando caught him, and as they came out of the final corner onto the long start-finish straight, Charles went off track, and Lando was able to go sailing by and go on to claim that runner-up spot. As we know, that was quite a hair-raising moment for Charles. Now, as I say, this was a leading question, quote unquote, in the FIA stewards document. What did you say to yourself? And Charles' response was, and he used the F word. Another difference between the instance with Max and the instance with Charles is that Charles immediately realised his error and apologised, something that Max never did actually do. So the stewards in this case have determined that the level of severity in using the F word in Max's case compared to Charles's case, there is a discrepancy. And in Charles's case, they've decided to hand out a €10,000 fine. €5,000 is suspended pending their no repeat within the next 12 months. So, yes, folks, we've seen it over many, many times with stewards' decisions, their determination with regard to certain incidents on track, how they view those, which of course has been really in the public spotlight over the past two Grand Prix in the United States and Mexico City. Well, now the FIA and its stewards have determined that there is a level of severity when it comes to using the F word. Go figure.
And I mean, again, we speak about how racing incidents, there have been times where different penalties have been awarded for similar moves, and now it seems that for a similar word being said, there's now different punishments. And of course, for those who are watching this F1 update, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below on the different penalties being awarded for the same word being used by Charles and Max. And of course, you imagine that on Saturday, Max and probably Christian Horner are both going to be asked for their thoughts on this. Christian in particular, obviously, has said that he wants to see consistent decisions and obviously questioned the racing guidelines and the changes that are going to be made. But do you think this is going to just further infuriate Max, that yes, okay, the instance of him and Charles using the same word come under very different circumstances, given the questions they were asked and the way they were speaking and the way they then used that word. But do you think this is, again, following on from what happened in Mexico City, this is just going to infuriate Max even more?
I can't imagine infuriate, Nick. I can imagine when
A bit of a
somebody
big word,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean, mate. But I get your gist. Don't worry. But I can imagine when somebody approached him this evening, whoever it might have been, within Red Bull, and say, "You're not going to believe this, Max.
Yeah.
This is what's happened to Charles." I can imagine he just sat there, shook his head, probably laughed, and just went, "Do you know what? Whatever. It is the FIA. It is the stewards. They do what they want." And it's pretty much been what he's been saying most recently after these incidents, with Lando Norris in the United States and Mexico City. He drives the way he wants to drive, and in this respect, he will act the way he wants to act, and he will talk the way he wants to talk. He has managed to keep himself in check. He almost used the shirt word in the Thursday press conference.
What's that word?
Yeah, go figure. He almost used that word, managed to rein himself in during Thursday's FIA official drivers press conference. Realised that, if he did use it, he was going to get in an awful lot of trouble again. So for Max, this is just going to be water off a duck's back. And it's just like, do you know what? Whatever, just do what you want to do, stewards. Doesn't matter. You just decide the rules as you go along, basically. Well, as I say now, Nick, now we've got a differentiation into the tone, nuance of when an F word is used. In my book, an F word is an F word, regardless of how it's said, whether it's venomous, whether it's in jest. It's still an F word. It's a rude word. It's a coarse word. To use the terminology used in both stewards' documents, it is a coarse word. If it's a coarse word, surely it gets the same punishment. I don't know. What do you think? Let us know what you think. Should there be one single punishment, a universal punishment for the use of what is effectively a swear word? It's a swear word, regardless of how you use it. But obviously now the stewards, in their infinite wisdom, the FIA in its infinite wisdom, has decided there is a price to pay, regardless of, depending on the severity of the use of that word and in what manner, in what tone that word is used. So there we go. FIA stewards all over. We've been talking about them such an awful lot lately. And this is probably just going to add grist to that mill.
And obviously, we don't want to be talking about them. We want to be talking about the topics happening on the circuit, because there are so many storylines towards the end of the season. And obviously, another, which is going to play a big part this weekend, is, of course, Max Verstappen having a 5-place grid penalty for Sunday's Grand Prix. Each driver is only allowed 4 internal combustion engines per season. He's now on his 6th. That's obviously quite an extraordinary feat in itself, but a 5-place penalty for Max on Sunday. He starts the sprint race on Saturday in 4th, and obviously Red Bull not looking anywhere near the pace of McLaren, who look to be in a league of their own in Interlagos. But the big thing for Max, it seems that the forecast is expected to take a pretty big turn for the worse on Saturday. That could be what he really needs to ensure that Lando doesn't get a big point toll on him.
We could have a huge downpour for qualifying. This is Grand Prix qualifying I'm talking about, folks, because we already had sprint qualifying today, Friday. Yes, it's looking like it's going to be very wet indeed for Grand Prix qualifying. And as we all know, when it's like that, it opens up a whole can of worms, and that can of worms is made even bigger by the fact that this circuit has only recently been resurfaced. Now, to aid that resurfacing, the track, to increase the abrasiveness, has been water blasted. So you would assume that to a certain extent, as opposed to a recent Turkish Grand Prix going back a few years ago where they resurfaced the track but didn't water blast it, and all the oils and bitumen rose to the top and just created for a skating rink when it rained again over the course of that Turkish Grand Prix weekend, that you'd hope that a certain effectiveness has been made to the track to prevent, again, all those oils rising to the top, to prevent Interlagos turning into a similar skating rink. But who knows what might happen, Nick. It's really open to the elements. And as you say, Max with a 5-place grid penalty. If he repeats his qualifying performance, let's just, for the sake of argument, in Grand Prix qualifying, as he had for sprint qualifying, as you say, starting 4th, that would place him 9th on the grid for Grand Prix qualifying. So yes, that would make for a difficult afternoon, Sunday afternoon's work for Max. But nevertheless, the reason why grid penalties, power unit penalties, are taken at this track is because it does lend itself to overtaking. So he will have that in his favour.
Yeah.
But as regardless of where he starts, is he going to get close to the McLarens? Certainly based on the evidence of Friday in practice and sprint qualifying, the answer to that is no, because McLaren has brought this really what appears to be effective new medium downforce rear wing specifically tailored for Interlagos and the effects of this track. And boy, did it look like it's working a treat so far.
And let's talk about McLaren, because particularly in sprint qualifying, a league of their own, we were actually expecting, at least I was, based on the first 2 parts, for Lando Norris to claim a pretty comfortable sprint pole. That didn't happen in the end. Oscar Piastri with a spectacular final lap in qualifying on a lap old soft tyres. He'd already done 1 hot lap, went through the pits as a cool down, went back out, set pole for the sprint. A big surprise. And what's really interesting with McLaren is, obviously the question was asked by Sky Sports to Oscar, will you let Lando pass? And Oscar does seem that very much for the sprint, he's more than happy to give up a sprint win to Lando. Of course, it will only be 1 point difference. But for McLaren, it's a difficult one to manage because Interlagos is such a quirky circuit in that the run from the start from the start line to the first corner is not very long. It's a corner where we've seen over the years several incidents as well.
It's going to be a real tough one to manage. Now, if we go back to the Italian Grand Prix, Nick, and think when we heard that wonderful phrase, papaya rules, when that was first introduced and how that did not work out. Obviously, yes, there have been many conversations that have taken place inside McLaren since then. McLaren has decided to prioritise Lando. And here we are, effectively for the first time since the Italian Grand Prix, we have the opportunity, and McLaren has the opportunity, to try and now put all those words into actions. And we're going to see exactly how this is going to play out. As you say, it is a very short rundown to that first corner. We've seen many accidents, many incidents, many cars going off track through the centre S's. And right behind Lando Norris is Max Verstappen. It's not a case of Lando's on pole, Max is 4th. They've got the different angles to go at. This is Max right behind Lando. So it's going to be a real interesting rundown to that first corner. And then if McLaren are able to maintain that 1-2, for argument's sake, if Oscar is in front of Lando, it's then going to be a case, bearing in mind, you would assume, with the pace of that Muckle 38, with that new rear wing, they should be able to pull away from the field behind them. And then it's just going to be a case of managing when they do that switch. Because, as you say, for 1 point, they're going to, if they do score a 1-2, then really it's going to be in Lando's best interest to reverse those places and allow Lando to take the sprint victory ahead of Oscar, but still scoring, of course, the same number of points, 15, regardless if it was Oscar ahead of Lando.
And of course, if the weather does play a part on Saturday in the sprint race and in qualifying, it does look like, once again, Max Verstappen is going to be fighting for Red Bull on his own. Sergio Perez knocked out in SQ2 in bizarre circumstances, actually. Perez will start the sprint race in P13, has a new chassis for this weekend as well. But I mean, a circuit as short as Interlagos to be starting from P13, I mean, with the conditions as well expected to be pretty nasty. Not looking good for the Mexican driver.
Yeah, let's just clarify up a little bit on the weather. Now, the forecast at the moment is for a dry sprint race. The wet weather is going to hit qualifying.
Yeah.
So that being the case, as I say, you would assume that sprint should play out relatively normally, barring any incidents. Relatively. This is Interlagos at the end of the day. So, as I say, should. Regard to Checo, do you know what? In SQ1, he actually had the upper hand on Max. He was actually quicker than Max. And for a moment, you thought, you know what? Maybe Red Bull has stumbled upon something here. They've reverted back to an old chassis for Checo. Apparently been moaning blind about it in Mexico City. Helmut Marko had confirmed that there was going to be a change. So there has been a change. He's gone back to this older chassis. And as I say, for SQ1, it looked like it was going to play into his hands, reap some dividends for once. But Checo being Checo, didn't get the lap out of his first run in SQ2. And by that stage, when it was realised that the track evolution was so quick, by the time it was decided that, Checo, you need to go again and do a second lap, it was too late. And he never crossed the line and they had to abort the lap. So Checo blamed the programming. Helmut Marko effectively blamed Checo for not doing a good enough first lap. So, and then of course, after blaming Checo for not doing that, Helmut Marko then of course sang the praises of Liam Lawson, who of course did make SQ3. So the situation within Red Bull at the moment is just like, it's a roller coaster because you just can't call it from one day to the next what is going to happen with that team at the end of the season. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner now have turned around and said a decision will be made at the end of the season. Sergio Perez on Thursday has absolutely stated categorically he will be at Red Bull in 2026. He does not know what Helmut Marko is on about. We have a bit of a divide going on here between management and driver. Generally, there's usually only one winner in those types of scenarios, and it's the management, because they hold the upper hand regardless of what contract Checo might have. And if they deem they want him gone, he'll be gone.
Well, you mentioning Liam was a perfect time to run through the top 10 on the grid. Provisionally for the sprint races, Oscar Piastri on pole with Lando Norris in second, Leclerc in third, Verstappen fourth, Carlos Sainz in fifth, George Russell sixth, Pierre Gasly seventh, Liam Lawson, who Ian just mentioned, will start in eighth, Alex Albon P9 and Oliver Bearman P10. And people might be wondering, Bearman, what's he doing qualifying for the sprint race? Well, Ian, a bit of an interesting story in that Kevin Magnussen was ruled out of Friday earlier in the day on Friday. We then found out, obviously, Oliver Bearman would be replacing him for first practice. I say first practice, the only practice session, and also for sprint qualifying. Of course, by him taking part in sprint qualifying meant that by the regulations had to take part in the sprint race. But the question was, would K-Mag be back for traditional qualifying per se on Saturday afternoon and then the Grand Prix on Sunday? That's not the case. K-Mag is out for the entire weekend, and Oliver Bearman gets another weekend in an F1 car.
Yeah, Haas have made a really early call on this. When we got the news early about, as you say, that Ollie would take place in practice sprint quali in the sprint, you would assume that Haas, Kevin, would leave it until the Saturday morning to determine whether he would be fit enough to take part in qualifying and the Grand Prix. As it transpires, with Haas making the decision early Friday evening, Sao Paulo time, it must be pretty obvious that Kevin's not in great shape, that he's just not going to be fit enough regardless of what medications he might be on, what rest he might be able to get overnight, that they've had to make this call right here, right now. So obviously, our very best wishes go to Kevin. Call now is he going to see out the last three Grand Prix? We've got to consider that, because Ollie Bearman now is got this third full Grand Prix weekend opportunity. And the knock-on effect of that, and people might not appreciate this, is that it actually rules him out of now the end-of-season test in Abu Dhabi, which takes place on the Tuesday after the curtain-closing Grand Prix at the Yas Marina circuit in early December. Because by the letter of the law, by the regulations, a young driver to take part in that test has to compete it in no more than 2 Grand Prix. This weekend, this is now going to be Ollie Bearman's third Grand Prix. So what's going to happen going forward? Given that Ollie's performance and what he's achieved over this weekend, and of course what he's achieved previously over the previous 2 Grand Prix weekends, again it raises the question, as we have a gap after this Grand Prix in Sao Paulo of 2 blank weekends before we go into the season concluding triple header in Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. Does Haas decide, obviously in conjunction with Kevin, to say, Kevin, thank you very much. This is it. We'd like to run Ollie for these last 3 Grand Prix. He's going to be our driver next season. In some respects, I very much hope that isn't the case, because Kevin's had a really good run recently. Nico Hulkenberg and Haas have really shone over these last 2 Grand Prix in the United States and Mexico City. The team has shown what it can do, and Kevin has shown what he can do. And so I really do hope that, in many respects, as I say, for Kevin, that Haas do not make such a call and bring Ollie in, and Kevin is allowed to see out his F1 career in good fashion, shall we say, and not end it on this weekend being ill, being forced out of the car through illness, and we say cheerio in that respect. I don't see it happening. I really don't. I'd be very surprised if that was the case. I was just throwing it out there as a possibility, because you never know in F1. Stranger things have happened. We use that phrase, and who knows, stranger things could happen in this case. But as I say, I really hope not for Kevin's sake, because I do think he deserves the type of send-off that Daniel Ricciardo didn't get with RB and the Red Bull family.
Absolutely. Of course, we send our best wishes to K-Mag, and hopefully as a speedy recovery. Finally, Ian, you mentioned a little bit earlier on about obviously the new track surface. Lewis Hamilton, another driver who had a bit of a shocking sprint qualifying starts P11 for the sprint race, complained interestingly about the track surface. Lots of drivers have, saying that it's bumpier than it was before they did the resurfacing. And something that was really interesting in what Lewis said is he compared it obviously to the 2022 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and said that the ride in his Mercedes was just as bad as that. Of course, in the only practice session, complained of being in pain, was asking how much longer he had left in the session. It's an interesting one, because there's been a lot of complaints already on the opening day about this track surface, and particularly from Lewis, who obviously, as you remember correctly, back in Baku in 2022, was seen literally being helped out of his car after the race because he was in such pain.
Yeah, there is a difference, of course, Nick, between the two situations. Of course, back then in 2022, that was, of course, the start of the new regulatory era that we've got now with these ground effect cars. And, of course, on that particular occasion, that was more to do with the porpoising of the car, with the way the ground effect was working. Yes, still a bumpy circuit in Azerbaijan, but the combination of those two really had a very, very painful effect on Lewis Hamilton. On this occasion, yes, we know the ride of that Mercedes is not as smooth as the team would like it, doesn't suffer from porpoising anymore. However, as I say, with the slightly bouncier ride that the car has compared to some of its rivals, running over a circuit that is as bumpy as this one has been made with the new resurface, or with the resurfacing, not the new resurfacing, with the resurfacing, then yes, it made for a very painful ride. So going into sprint quali, the team has had to make the car a little softer to ensure that to ensure that Lewis and George did not suffer with the severity that they encountered with regard to the bumpiness in practice compared to sprint quali and going forward into the rest of the weekend. But yeah, Interlagos has decided to do this resurfacing as part of its major upgrade of the circuit. It's done grandstands, it's done the main pit complex, just to try and bring it into line with some of its peers on the F1 calendar. And how you make such a bad job of resurfacing a track just beggars belief, because pretty much you have a blank canvas to work with, i.e. the entire 3-point-odd kilometres of this particular circuit, and it somehow managed to blow it by being unable to make the surface smooth.
Yeah.
Modern technology these days, they've certainly not been able to use it to the best of its ability, and they've made what appears to be a pretty rank bad job of it.
Ian, Do you see the time? It's bold prediction time, and I don't know how we're going to do this because the weather is going to be mental on Saturday. I'll kickstart things, give you a few seconds. Because the sprint race at the moment is looking dry, I think Lando Norris will win the sprint race. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I'm going to say for qualifying, should qualifying take place, because the weather is looking at the moment that bad where even qualifying could be a bit sketchy. I'm going to say Max Verstappen. I think if it's going to be wet conditions, it's difficult to bet on anyone other than Max. If it is going to be as wet, and it's looking like it's going to be really wet, it's going to be you.
Yeah, that's a good call, mate. Oh dear. Yeah, you've put me on the spot there with that one. I knew it was coming. I always know bold prediction is coming. But as you say, the fact that we've got such a wet qualifying forecast,
Yeah.
knowing this now, it's probably going to be as dry as anything.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be. But hey, we can only go on the forecast that we're looking at. So
the
if we get it wrong,
as well. So
as I say, if we get it wrong, that's not our fault. We're only looking at what the forecast is showing us.
yep.
I know. I just think that McLaren's got too much about it.
Yeah.
The one thing about the McLaren is, and there was a considerable difference between first practice and sprint qualifying, and that was the temperature drop. And first practice was ran in glorious sunshine, clear blue skies, and then a few hours later, sprint qualifying, really cloudy, grey cloud coming in, even a threat of rain. Track temperature dropped 20 degrees. We could see something very similar tomorrow between the sprint race and the Grand Prix qualifying. And if track temperature is going to be low again, we know the McLaren works well in lower track temperatures. So I cannot see anything other than another repeat of a McLaren 1-2 for the front row tomorrow, regardless of whether the track is cool, damp or wet. I just think that Muckle 38 this weekend with that rear wing on it, specifically tailored to this circuit, has just got too much in hand for its rivals.
Very, very interesting. Of course, for those who are watching this video, let us know your bold predictions for the sprint race and qualifying in the comment section below. On top of that, please do smash the like button and subscribe to the channel, which is amazing to see more and more of you are doing. So please, thank you very much. Keep it up. Let's see how many subs we can end this season on. This has been the post-Friday Brazilian Grand Prix F1 update from myself and Ian. We will see you after qualifying and the sprint race on Saturday. See you later.
As always, take care, folks.